Happy New Year! Here's a review roundup. Triple Threat has a terrible premise, that being Spike trying to keep his dragon friend and changeling friend separate for a stupid and paranoid reason. This terrible premise is saved by Thorax and Ember showing up and being their beautiful selves. Thorax is basically the worst king ever, while Ember does everything from throw shade at Starlight to unlock Thorax's inner sub. Enjoyment of Triple Threat is entirely centered on how much you like both Thorax and Ember, and how much you're willing to put up with Twilight, Spike, and Starlight being Twilight, Spike, and Starlight all over the place. Rapunzel's family was not something I ever had too much interest in. The king has so far been the worst character in the series by virtue of being a stick in the mud with no piss-taking. Ariana is nice, but that's all either of her parents have going for her. Now we introduce Rapunzel's Aunt Willow, and holy shit, I want to club this woman with a pipe wrench. Willow is the first genuinely bad character ever introduced into the series, but she certainly wasn't the last. Shoutouts to Varian. She shows up, is an insufferable little shit for the whole episode, supposedly learns an episode by the end, but actually not really. Willow's presence is grating, and the fact that the episode is centered entirely around her is even worse. Definitely a candidate for the bottom 5 of the season, hands down. Campfire Tales is a collection of lore stories, and the episode has no real plot beyond it. In Shadowplay, the only pillar who got a decent amount of dialogue was Star Swirl, so their inclusion into this mix was completely superfluous, rendering this episode a complete waste of everyone's time. This is another example of Friendship is Magic giving the audience what they think they want and focusing on the lore in a character-driven show. This is like if Friends had a 2-part episode showing how Gunther opened Central Perk. I'm sure some people wanted that lore, but no. Just no. I was worried this was gonna happen. Queen for a Day is an episode I suspect many people are gonna call the part where the show gets good because it's darker, more serious, and has a lot of tense moments. It's basically everything that Star vs. the Forces of Evil turned into and what a lot of modern shows have been doing in the last few years. I hate it. I absolutely fucking hate it. It used to be that you could have action, drama, and comedy shows coexist, but these days it seems that if a show comes around and is a good and lighthearted comedy that gives even the slightest hint of a future plot ideas, its fandom will dogpile onto it and demand that it get more serious and more serialized, and it looks like they're getting what they want. I suppose the big failing of Queen for a Day could be summed up with the following. The episode spends half its running time setting up Varian's grief and subsequent fall into villain, anti-hero, edgelord of the week, whatever. I was making fun of it the whole time and couldn't give two shits about what happens to the little scrote. Meanwhile, they did a death fake out with Pascal, and I was actually in tears before they revealed he was alright. You could chalk that down to me adoring Pascal and simultaneously being so completely tired of this tragic villain storyline after Friendship is Magic has been beating that dead horse for upwards of 4 years now, but honestly I'd be bored with Varian's story even if that wasn't the case. Varian is just not that interesting, and I doubt the effectiveness of a story centered around him. My continued interest in Tangled is going to depend entirely on how intrusive these elements become in later seasons, as this trend in animation is a massive deal breaker for me. If I want drama, I'll watch a drama, and I'd prefer it if drama didn't keep forcing its way into comedies. Daring Done made the blandest episodes of Season 7 list, so I'll be brief. This episode is once again using lore as a crutch to avoid having to tell a real story, and like with Campfire Tales, Shadow's Play's focus on Star Swirl and Stygian renders all of it moot anyway. Same problem, different episode. Painter's Block is a mixed bag. It's trailing off from Queen for a Day, with Rapunzel being anxious about her disastrous time ruling the kingdom. OMG guys, continuity, that automatically means it's good. And none too subtly implying that after the storm was over, they just kind of forgot to check up on Varian, so Rapunzel can't paint without getting echoes of all the stuff that happened in Queen for a Day, leaving her open to be exploited by a witch. And the episode just kind of trods in circles for a good 15 minutes before the climax. Cast Leroy Jenkins to witch though, that was cool. I gave A Health of Information the honor of best episode of Season 7, and that's because it's brilliantly written in every possible way. Not only does the episode feature a determined and loyal Fluttershy, which is the best Fluttershy, and I'll fight you on that, but it also gives an example of how to use lore properly. Lore is always tertiary to story and characters, but many bronies erroneously value lore more than everything else because it's easier to digest than the stories themselves and easier to write wikis about. It's easy to record what happens, but a lot harder to think about why it happens, which is what you need to consider when looking at the actual story. So the end result is that most fans just don't bother because recording the backstory takes less effort. But A Health of Information throws that idea away and uses lore exactly as it should be used. It only comes up when it's necessary. Fluttershy learns about Mage Meadowbrook explicitly because she needs the cure that Meadowbrook herself discovered. The story calls for lore to reinforce it, and the lore doesn't overstay its welcome. I've been complaining about the lore throughout most of Season 7, but this is the answer to the question, how do you do lore well? And the answer is, only when necessary. Look at how gay Cassandra is, oh my god. Okay, Not in the Mood was just a lot of fun. The entire episode was one long colossal fuck up after another, and it's great watching an entire house of cards fall down on itself, rebuild itself, and then fall down on itself all over again. That's basically all the episode really has going for it, and it's fucking wonderful. A lot of people seem to want Tangled to have this big mystery and complicated plot, judging by how much the stinger set them off. Personally, I'd be totally okay if they just quietly dropped the shit with Varian and went on with episodes like this. More of this, please. A lot more of this. Fuck Marks and Recreation. Alright, I'll talk about Marks and Recreation. Marks and Recreation has two overall concepts and both of them suck. The first is Rumble not wanting a cutie mark, through which he spends the entire episode being a mopey little bastard and repeating Starlight's usual platitudes, and the rest of the characters go, independent thought detected, commence beatings. The second is cutie marks themselves. Cutie marks are probably the worst thing Friendship is Magic has and are only carried over from previous generations because of tradition. Honestly, Friendship is Magic shouldn't have made cutie marks a story point to begin with because they keep having to turn it into this cultural milestone that is only unique to Equestria, but their specifics keep changing from episode to episode. First, they're the magic that dictates your skills, then they aren't, then they are again, then they're meaningless, then they're everything, then you're worrying about them too much, then not enough. Oh my god, will you just make up your fucking minds? The problem with cutie marks is that they're not applicable to anything in real life. Marks and Recreation's one saving grace is that it tells children that having a day job is not a terrible thing, but children don't need to be told this. Admittedly, a lot of adults do. When I presented my idea for Starlight's town in Inferno, a lot of people said that a fatal flaw with that town is that some people might be forced to do a job they don't like. The hole in this argument is that this is the system we live in now. Most people work day jobs they don't like. Peoples whose careers match their passions are the exception, not the rule. Welcome to life. You're not as free as you think you are. Okay, here's the short version. Would I be watching this if I didn't have in-a-minute videos to write? No. Funnily enough, the only reason animated Harry Potter was even on the patron poll was because Sketchy vouched for it, and he's proven to have much better taste in shows than the average rando. The first episode was alright, a solid C-. The only real highlight was Fluttershy going from 0 to fuck you in 2 seconds, and then everything else she did throughout the entire episode. The big downside to Little Witch Academia is the protagonist. To compare, it took Steven 4 entire episodes to get as annoying as this girl got within 5 minutes, and that's impressive, but probably not in the way the writers were hoping. The idea of a slice of life story in a school of witchcraft that's just barely skirting the edge of copyright infringement is a promising one, but I'd be lying if I said I expected it to stay on that track. I've already been warned by not only Sketchy, but TV tropes of all places that this show disappears up its own ass like Star vs. the Forces of Evil and Tangled do. But we'll have to wait until at least March to find out if this is actually the case. First impressions say don't waste your time. I can get a lot of material from taking the piss out of a show like this, but a show being good for in a minute doesn't necessarily mean it's fit for public consumption. And that's my time. I'll see you next month.